I can remember being very confused about my class because my mum didn't want to be working class. So I was made to feel terribly ashamed and embarrassed at the same time because she was quite clearly, and still is, quite clearly a working class woman, and she still does it. And now I feel stronger in terms of trying to raise it with her, but I realise that she's very old now and it's hard for her to change, but she wants so desperately to be middle class, but she doesn't really quite understand what middle class is. So we go to shops, or she'd try and, well, she could never really quite make a fuss because she never had that confidence, so she'd never really lose her temper. But she'd be saying something to me in a sort of broad Geordie accent outside the shop, and the minute we walked in, take anybody home from school, because if I brought anybody home immediately, she wouldn't be my mum. She'd be this strange person trying to put on this, and I would...
Performing?
Yes, and I'd feel awful inside because I think, oh, you know, you're making such a fool of yourself, and you don't want your mum to make a fool, and she still does it now. You know, if she's at my house and anybody comes, immediately out comes the voice. And I say to her, look, Mum, you know, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be ashamed. You don't have anything to be ashamed of. You know, working class is something to be proud of. I'm not working class. And so I find that very, very difficult.
I mean, the whole thing about the way that people speak and the way that you speak too, I think, has quite an impact on you. Going to school, sort of, it's quite a difficult affair, really, to begin with. Sort of thinking about the fact that I was instantly recognisable almost by virtue of the way that I spoke. You know, that I was from, you know, Craig Miller. You know, it's obvious, and I think that the way that I've sort of changed, my speech has changed, I think, quite dramatically over the years. From moving to Wales, I had enormous problems in understanding and being understood, and made conscious efforts to sort of slow down. But over that period of time, I think for sort of members of my family, I've come to be seen as being very anglicised, almost having an English accent, you know, which I find incredible. And it's all about sort of speaking properly and about coming across, and it's about being intelligent and not being sort of thick and stupid and working class, you know, all sorts of things go in line with that, I think.
I can't remember the process of learning to talk properly. You know, it's repressed completely. How I talked like my family at one point, and then years later I was talking differently. I was just not in touch with the process. But then something else happened, just very recently, where it did become possible to come out and be working class. But I still do it selectively. Like, the situation has to be right before I can let my Sheffield accent come through. And I have to judge whether the people I'm talking to might get one over on me if they hear me talk in a different way. And they might want to be nice to me because I'm working class, but really they'll patronise me. So I don't really have a proper voice. I have several, and they come out at different times. And it's partly defensive, and it's partly almost like being a chameleon, that for safety's sake, almost like your mother really, that I fit in with what's going on.
I was actually taught to speak differently as a typist, because I had to answer the telephone. And so much so, I mean, I was the secretary for years, that friends would ring up and say, could I speak to Joe? And I'd say, speaking. They'd say, good God, you know, we didn't recognise your voice. Yeah.
I'm now starting to get back to feeling that I can be comfortable with a more northern accent, and that's actually very important after years of being beaten by my mum and told to speak proper. But because I'm now working with a lot of working class kids and a lot of very damaged working class adults, I feel it's terribly important that I don't kind of stand there in front of them and sound like some sort of nice patronising middle class woman. That I've had to work through that, and it's since I've been working in that particular place that I've felt more at ease with my own class background and more able to say, right, stuff it, I'm not going to do the posh voice anymore. If they you know, if they're going to reject me because of what I sound like, then tough.
What was it like going to school for you as a poor girl?
Very alienating. It's very difficult to learn the rules because the rules are so different. And I was always getting into trouble when I first went to school. And I couldn't bring any friends home either. So that was very painful, learning the rules. And you got punished if you were late for school. I remember that. And we were always late because we had to do jobs before we came. I knew I was different from the moment I went in because they put the 4 kids from our estate on one table, all together. And my mum had told me that I wasn't to sit with this boy because his nose ran all the time. He didn't wipe his nose, and she was wanting to stress the difference between our family and his. I mean, he was one of 8 kids too. So I can remember, even at 5, feeling this great sense of indignation that he put on his table with all the look. So I think I realised the labelling then. It didn't take me long to discover that it was all the kids from the council's table on one table.
I can't remember primary school very well, but grammar school was just a long process of humiliation. Like, the pupils bullied one another and the teachers insulted the pupils and so on. And I couldn't figure it at all. I just couldn't figure it. And it's very rarely that I find myself in the environment which are played on the kind of home rules. Like, going away from home was very painful to my family because nobody ever did it. And when I first left home, I went to be an au pair. I read about it in a women's magazine. And it was the only entrance into another life, which I thought I had to have another life. But I do remember my father's look of total bewilderment and not being able to say that I really love you and I'm not going away because of that.
So you're not abandoning them?
That's right. But of course, in many ways it was an abandonment. And the proof of it was that I wasn't there when they died.
I actually couldn't wait to leave Edinburgh. Determined to leave from sort of quite early on. Couldn't bear living on the estate where we lived. It was just such an expanse of deprivation, really. And I was just really wanting to get out, not to live on a council estate, to live somewhere else, somewhere which was quite pretty, because although somewhere like Edinburgh is a really beautiful city, obviously it's got its sort of outer limits as well as anywhere else. I think for me there was a big thing about getting away from that kind of quite oppressive environment, really, to find somewhere else, you know, with greener fields.
Well, I lived in London. I mostly lived in London, and I wasn't allowed to leave home because there wasn't anywhere to go. My father said, "Why should you leave?" I didn't go to university, so I didn't until I was 25, and then there was a terrible row. He said, "Never come back again. You're breaking the family up." And that was his Victorian way of trying to control me. And I left in a flood of tears, and my mother saying, "Where did I go wrong? Why would I want to leave home at 25? You know, extraordinary. Now I think about it. But I saw a thing yesterday that said the older I get, the more I like what I used to be. And I find it ironic now that I tried to get out of my working class background, but when I go back there now, I wish it was there. Wish there was something to get hold of. But I couldn't get out there quick enough at the time.
I think I feel like Fiona does. I mean, I get this sense of
dread when I go back to Ashford last year.
I have to have a look at this sort of horrible little post-war council estate just to see. And then the house is still there. And it still looks as awful as it ever did. I don't feel any nostalgia about it.
My father died a couple of years ago, leaving an enormous gap, I think, in the life of my mother. And I often feel that I try to make it up to her. I try to make up for the fact that he died. I mean, a bit like, you know, she and everyone else is like my responsibility now. I mean, which is madness, I think, often at times, but it's there. And I think, but probably because I always thought it was up to me to look after everybody. You know, it feels like even more so now, particularly when there's no breadwinner in the family as such, and that all ties up with guilt at, I mean, the distance. You know, I think for me, geography is really important. I mean, I made, you know, great efforts to get at least 500 miles away from Edinburgh. So that's important. On the other hand, I actually feel very guilty for the fact that I'm not around. I'm not fulfilling the role that I think some parts of me think that I should be filling.
My main memory of my parents is my shame now that I should have disliked them so much. I feel terrible that I lived in a family that I actively wanted to leave for as long as I could remember. But that does tend to go back to the war, when I was evacuated 3 times. And, I mean, I definitely blame my mother for World War II, you know. Absolutely no doubt about it. I have forgiven her now, but unfortunately she died about 18 years ago, so it's a bit late.
I think she probably knew she couldn't cause it.
I think she knew she couldn't cause it, yes. But she certainly, I felt a great deal of antagonism towards being abandoned. And my brother staying at home because he was too little to be evacuated. So I couldn't get out of my family quick enough, but I didn't go to university. I didn't do any of those things until I was 46. I think my main bone of contention in our family was my sexuality. And my sexuality started to come to life. Nobody wanted to know about it. And it was like it wasn't going on, so I led a completely double life in which I talked to my mother about love affairs and kissing, but nothing else at all. Ever. I was very conscious of not wanting to go out with boys like my brother, who was doing an apprenticeship in a factory when I left school. And feeling awful about it, actually, but deciding it was all going to be just a waste of time, and tending to go for middle-class boys. And very quickly that escalated into foreigners in inverted commas, who I seemed to be off the hook with because they didn't judge my class. It seemed to be a completely different thing going on with men from another culture. With the middle-class boyfriends, I was totally judged and surveilled, always, by their mothers mostly. And I can remember being taken out by a boyfriend to buy a frock, a special frock to go and meet his mother, which I wouldn't have been seen dead in normally. And being told his father was a brigadier when I got there. Thinking, oh my God. And the whole thing was just awful. And yet I really loved this guy. You know, I thought the sun shone out of his arse, to be honest about it. But once I'd met his parents, I realised it just wasn't on. And it happened several times in several years. It's very painful, very, very painful. Now I understand my sexuality is what I had to offer to the men that I knew. And all the time I was judged to be low class. That was how I felt. That I was always in the servant position. And yet I was trying to get out of the position my mother had been in, and yet I entered it in another way. But it was exciting. It was a way out of my family. And I moved towards, through the boyfriends, I moved away from working class culture completely. got introduced to music, literature, all sorts of things.
I think the place where I felt the most fraudulent was at university. I just felt I shouldn't really be there. I found it very alien still. And I got to learn the rules all over again, because they were different rules to the ones at primary school. I went to Newcastle because somebody told me it was working. I think I read Cosmopolitan. There was an article on universities and it said Newcastle was a working class university. I went there. Terrible. I went to uni dance and I got stood by this guy who'd seen me in Woolworths, and I thought he meant he'd seen me, but he thought he'd seen me behind the counter. And a lot of the male students were looking for girls from town because they were of easier virtue. And
You could use them.
and then I had another situation where somebody thought I was one of the girls, you know, who just sort of managed to get into the dance and wasn't a student, and I was most indignant. I felt, well, there must be something about me that, I mean, I didn't look the part even. I had to try harder. I think that's why, when I went to university, after that third week, I got myself a regular steady boyfriend and hung on to him for dear life for the whole 3 years. Because at least it meant I didn't have to deal with those issues.
Protected you.
Yeah.
Smart.
I'm not so sure it's smart in retrospect. Yeah. I mean, I might have been better taking a few risks, because I ended up marrying that person, and there were good things, but there were also things that didn't work.
Certain things I thought I would never recover from, that were to do with class and education, but I cried about them for years. But now I've stopped, and something else is happening, but I'm not sure what it is. Like what I used to cry about, and which blocked my education, was that education separated me physically from my family. And when I was away doing my first degree, my father died, so I wasn't present at his death. And then years later I was doing an MA, and my mother died. And that kind of just made education seem just a total waste of time, a total and utter waste of time, and all my knowledge seemed frivolous, really. And I felt bitter that my education separated me from them, rather than enabling me to do something for them. And for years it did. And like I did, my first degree was in literature, which is all about class hatred, really. And I wanted to firebomb the estate that I lived on because I thought it was so awful. And I couldn't go down to the local shopping centre because when I saw women in curlers outside the supermarket, I thought I'd have a trauma, you know, because I've got sensibility by then. And I had it for years, and I'm really glad I've got rid of it. But I think I'm only just well, I don't know if I'm getting rid of that, but I just had so much rage against education that I put my all into it, and that I was sold a pup, if you like, that it was kind of useless knowledge and so on. But on the other hand, I'm really glad I've got it, because I suppose because my parents are dead, I just remember the best things about them. And I'm cut off from the fact that I felt if I didn't leave home, I'd die. Because my parents were really loving and gentle, and I was bored to death.
What's your biggest struggle? What's the one that always gets you?
It's not being good enough.
just really basically not being good enough. But believing that, and I think coupled with that, I mean, often a sort of sense of terror, really, about what I may or may not achieve, because I'm not sure what I can achieve. I think that it would be good to try, and I think that I've tried with things, but even once I try and I might have managed to do something, it is just like disbelieving that it ever happened. And it's like knowing who you are in sections, really. I mean, I know who I am in that place, and I know who I am in that place, but not knowing perhaps who I am or who I want to be just for me, really.
Why do you think you accumulated those feelings of inferiority? Who told you that you weren't good enough?
I don't know, my mother was always telling me that she was never good enough. She still tells me that she's not good enough.
What's she trying to say there? Don't expect anything of me because I'm not good enough. Or do it for me, or what's behind it? What do you read that message to be?
Conflicting message, really, because on the one hand I think it's I'm not good enough, but you could be. Then again, you're my daughter, so you may not be. You may be the same as me. I mean, I don't think she knew really, but I think she would have liked that not to have been the case. I think she had a very deep sense of inferiority. I think my dad could never face himself, really. He could never really honestly. I think he was just too frightened to really look at himself, and I think he had a vision of himself as he would like to be, which was some kind of giant figure, and fears about being, this dwarf. I think both of them have had quite confused and very uncertain sense of self, and I think I pick up on that.
Do you have a sense that you won't survive just as your dad didn't?
That I won't survive?
Don't think now.
I think, yeah.
Stay there.
I think I might not survive, yeah. I don't know what I won't survive.
Life. It might be that dwarf. Just like he was. And suffer all the pain that you watched him suffer. His drama is present for you. You're seeing yourself as like him. Yeah.
I do see myself as like him.
Yeah. And he's now dead. And you need to kind of separate from him because you're alive. And what happened for him or to him does not need to happen to you. And I just don't think you're that sure.
What I can recollect very strongly is just being a member of a family who were incredibly defensive about their position in society. And also I think my parents saw the world as very hostile, quite alien and quite difficult to deal with and confront. And I have a strong sense of this defensiveness and also the need to challenge as well. My father was quite sort of a strong union activist in an area where there weren't many strong union activists, and that was, I got a very powerful things from my childhood of his anger and rage about the way the world was, and also his sort of frustration and impotence that he wasn't really able to do anything. And he actually took industrial action on his own once, which was very self-defeating. And so from a very early age I got a very strong sense of the world being a very unfair place, very inequitable. And I think I still carry that around with me now. It's something I've internalised very powerfully. I think that's why I went to university to do a politics degree and decided that, you know, I'd work on what I saw as my front line, which is the primary classroom. And I'm still there. I think it must be 19 years now. And I think I've got to the stage where I know that my little battle, you know, my individual battle to change things isn't working in that context. But I'm still there banging my head against the wall.
I don't feel it right this minute, but sometimes and recently I've almost felt that I was my father. That there wasn't a point where he ended and I began. And a lot of that's really positive, like he was a very, very gentle person and full of respect for other people and so on, and very, very kind, and I'm really glad that I've got all of that. But also my mother used to say things like, your father is too good for this world. And I also realised that that being like him makes me very powerless sometimes, and that I withdraw from situations and so on. But the other thing about my father was that, first of all, when I was born, he was still a manual worker. And like in those days, like manual workers worked such incredibly long hours. And like he left at 6 in the morning. No, he got up at 6 and he left before we got up. And he came home as we were going to bed. And he worked on a Sunday. And on a Saturday he slept until the afternoon. And he was really exhausted. He was really exhausted. And like when he got older, which was not that much older because he died when he was 64, he had, which I don't know, it might have been Parkinson's disease, but he trembled. And the doctor said to him, well, I'm sorry, Ernest, there's nothing we can do for you, you're worn out. And I kind of always had that sense that working class life wore my father out, and that I'll never forget that I'm working class because he died before retirement. It's the absolute, utter and total injustice of it, really. It's just, it's so unjust. I think maybe that's one reason why I've never earned much money. I just, I find it inconceivable that people can live the luxurious life they lead when in the same city, you know, men are still getting asbestosis when they're 30 odd and stuff like that. I just find it absolutely inconceivable. But at the same time, I'm not a health and safety officer, and I teach useless things like film appreciation and stuff like that. And I realise that we don't all, that I don't down tools and go and fight this injustice at every minute of the day. It's really funny, kind of, that in one sense I have that real strong of working class identity that kind of flares up. But I live in a totally middle class environment, and that feels a bit peculiar sometimes.
And why do you do that?
Why do I live there? Yeah, because I really enjoy, I suppose, all that's come from having an intellectual life, really. And like, kind of part of the pain in my family was a real silence. Like, I remember kind of sitting at the table with my mother and father. I can't remember my sister being there, so maybe it was later on. And just feeling this enormous love for all of them, this enormous love, and couldn't think of anything to say. And that we would have these meals in silence because we couldn't think of anything to say. And sometimes I get that now. Like, very recently I visited some friends. And the man is working class, and he finds it difficult when I'm there. He finds me a threat. And like, we were stuck for something to say. Like, I rapidly went through all the questions I could think of, and he tried a few. But we hadn't got shared ground. Like, I couldn't sort of talk about my job or what I'd read on the train and so on. So I suppose that's why I live in a middle-class environment, with left-wing academics, and if possible, working-class people who've gone through higher education, so that I can talk, really, and that I won't be returned to that place of silence.
At the time, sorry.
Working class tie. Yeah, I think it is. And I sometimes wonder why it's not being rubbed out. And I'm really glad it's not being rubbed out. And I think for a while I was a bit worried that it was a bit of a failure, really. And in a sense it was. Like, I got a degree and then I got a higher degree, and I haven't had a full-time job for 20 years. And I live in genteel poverty, and it's because I couldn't fully enter the world that I've been given a ticket for, because I don't fully take it seriously, and I think it's not very useful.
It's not yours either.
And it's not mine, but I enjoy enough of it not to give it up. And I always imagine that I'm going to reconcile them all. And then I'll have an income and things like that.
My parents had Muslims themselves. They both gave up alcohol and smoking when I was born. They didn't smoke or drink again until I was about 21, 22. So it was an enforced decision, not a pure choice. And they never went out either.
What was it like for you to watch these parents doing without?
I suppose I think everybody lives well. I thought it was that was what parenting was about.
terrified. Yeah. And what terrifies me is that I've become that sort of mother, I suppose. I'm always busy. Got too much to do. Full-time job, 2 children.
What would you feel if you stopped?
It would all build up and there'd be too much to cope with. It's just very hard to stop.
Can you imagine it?
Sitting down and playing with my I mean, there's lots of things about working class mothers not playing with their children, and I don't play with mine often. I mean, I know the theory, I know this thing about spending time with the children, talking and playing with them. And in spite of the knowledge I carry in my head, I'm still too busy.
My mum's still alive, and I sometimes feel I'd only ever be free when she's dead, and it's such a wicked thing to think. But I feel that while she's still there and while she's still around, and I've still got to fulfill this for her, and still fail, and still failing for her.
What would you have done if you succeeded?
I don't know what would ever have counted as succeeding for my mum, you see.
So you were a loser anyway?
Mm.
She set it up for you, didn't she?
My mother would always say, I never hit you hard enough to hurt you. Stop crying. And if ever I try and talk to her about it now, because I won't hit my kids at all. And she sometimes says, oh, they can do with a good wallop now and again, it doesn't do them any harm. And I say, well, I think it harmed me. I never hurt you, she said, or she'll say. And at the time, it was perfectly justifiable, whatever it was that I'd done, that she should beat me, she should hit me. And I can see that probably came from her own childhood as well. She's not a totally undamaged person. But it is that denial that they ever hurt me. Pardon?
And they did hurt
you. And they did hurt me, yeah.
I suppose I thought it would be different for my kids if I didn't do those things. And yet, certainly for my daughter, and I've got such a lot invested in that, I think, that relationship. And I just feel her pain so much too.
She's not alone, is she?
No. But I think she feels alone, even if she isn't. She's not old enough yet to quite understand. And I look at my son, my oldest son who's 10. And like Diane was saying earlier, there's all the guilt there about not spending time. And I think that because I've tried hard to not reproduce the relationship that was there when I was little, I've been so busy trying hard not to do that, I haven't had time to do something else. Then again, that's criticism, isn't it? I damn myself if I do, and I damn myself if I don't. It's very difficult because for a long time
I felt kind of competent and okay as a mum. I've got 2 children. I've got another child from another relationship. And a lot of my time I was living in a council estate, and I was coping. It was a day-to-day hustling to make sure the bailiffs were kept away and the bills were paid and everything else. And then I went as a mature student to college because I thought, well, this is the way out. At least I can, I can get means to support my kids and make a better life for them and so on. And part of that process was a relationship with somebody else, and now we have a child. And he is a tremendous parent and has this incredible relationship with his child, or our child. But a lot of it is actually denying any input from me, denying any kind of expertise, because he kind of looks at my 2 older kids and can see, as you do when kids get older, you can see that they've got flaws and they've got problems, and they're not, there's no such thing as a perfect person. But he can be sort of a bit of a perfectionist and a bit intolerant, and thinks that, well, I can do it better my way, because your way obviously didn't work, and that just hurts so much. Because that was the one thing that I used to hold on to and think I was good at. This wonderful fantasy that I'll just pack a bag one day, piss off, and come back. I'll do it one day. I suppose I had this overwhelming sense as well that being an adult was really, really hard. Which is probably one of the reasons why I'm hidden in this private classroom full of children most of my adult life.
And if you ever didn't want to have children, that was very fleeting, it seems.
Yes.
Because you've surrounded yourself by it. Do you have a sense that you're trying to make it all right for them?
Yeah,
Give them enough attention?
I was talking to Christy, wasn't I? I was saying how upsetting and how much anger and rage I feel when they talk to me about what they'd like to be, and they want to be architects and writers and graphic designers, and we're talking about local working class kids here, and that makes me feel angry and frustrated because they don't have low expectations of themselves. They want to be all sorts of things, and then I think about, the reality gap, the fact that they're not going to be all those things.
Yeah, when I was at school, I don't think we thought we could be any of those things.
Yeah.
That's the difference. We'd either be shop girls or factory workers or maybe white-collar workers, and that was it.
Well, my niece has just left school and she was debating between, what was it, being a model or a beautician. So in that sense, her horizons were broader than mine, but not very much broader.
Well, my niece has left school, and she told me recently that where she lives in rural Devon, most of the girls that she was at school with are now unmarried mothers or unemployed.
Yeah.
And the only option for her is to either work in the cheese factory or in the Mary Quant factory making dresses. So she went to the cheese factory because my brother works there. And for weeks, months, she's just been scraping mould off cheese all day long. She's not going to carry on doing that, but that's the only job that is actually available.
Yeah.
And then she comes home and she dresses as a beautiful young woman, and I mean, I can't reconcile the two. When she goes to work, she has to wear a cap, a uniform, and put steel-tipped shoes on in case the cheese gets dropped on her feet. And she's 19. And she's lucky. I keep saying, well, why don't you try this and why don't you try that? But I know that it took me nearly 30 years to get my act together to go on and do higher education. And the motivation isn't there. She just thinks it would be nice to be something else. She certainly isn't going to get the chances I've had in life, as limited as they were. It'd be just nice to be able to wave a magic wand and make it all right.
As long as we own the magic wand.
Mm.
No one knows we'd have to nick it or borrow it.
I think it's a horrible time to be growing old now. I mean, my despair is really around that more than anything else. We're not even going to have rights to pensions quite soon. And I think for women it's particularly difficult. Working class women particularly, if you don't have an income separate from a man, then it's going to be like my grandmother, who was terrified of being put in the workhouse. Whatever that would mean now. It must be an equivalent now. I know a lot about how to survive, but supposing my health breaks down, which it has done before, then I feel I'll just be pitched into hospital or something and abandoned somewhere in some geriatric ward. But then I think, well, I'd be lucky if even that happened these days. They don't even exist anymore. And that, I mean, I'm just thinking around my own family now of the options that were available, and there weren't any. Nobody owns any property or can go and buy their way into living in Spain, or that's my dream, to go and live in Spain and draw a pension there. But as I don't own any property and I have no pension rights, it's a pretty long way off happening, really.
Keep looking at me. That's back to that abandoning stuff, isn't it? Being abandoned.
Yeah.
Don't leave me here. The child, the evacuee.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Well, no, it's worse. It's actually worse, because I did survive that. And I feel as a woman my viability is sinking to zero, actually, the older I get and the uglier I get. I put these in inverted commas, these things. And the less I can earn a living, which politically I would like to do. I don't want to be dependent on somebody else financially. I don't want to have to keep house for someone in order to have a roof over my head, which, if a relationship is going wrong, is what it would be, which is what it would amount to. Whereas in the past I could walk out, I can't anymore if things go wrong, because I've got to survive by somebody keeping an umbrella over my head. That's what it feels like. So there's a drive to find new survival skills, really. I don't know where to get them from. I don't know what they would be. Put your money into dollars, you know, or buy rice in bulk. What are we talking about? I was in hospital 7 years ago thinking I was going to die, and I just sat there looking around at the women and thinking, well, there aren't many options, really. You either come out and sell yourself to somebody, or you have got to be well enough to work, or you're going to end up here. But I can't imagine what it would be like not to work. I just can't imagine sitting down and keeping still and doing nothing. My mother used to struggle down to the factory when she got terrible bronchitis. I understand it now. I never understood it then. I thought, why the hell doesn't she stay in bed? We were talking about stealing in the lunchroom. I started the subject off, actually, I must admit.
You're a bit of a thief.
Well, I certainly learnt to be streetwise as a child very quickly. I can steal very easily. Sometimes it's out of hatred, sometimes it's out of need. I have a feeling, very deep feeling, that if I do get to be older, I shall turn into a very good thief. It's not a nice way to think about surviving, though, but...
What have you got to lose?
I haven't got anything to lose. Also, given that I can pass as middle class very easily, I'm sure I'll have access to a lot of places that other people wouldn't expect me to be in. Oh, God. I'm delighted with the story of these two old age pensioners holding up the building society the other day. It's definitely not. I hadn't got their act together, actually. But they forgot to wear stocking masks.